Hello, hello.
Hello. Hello. Oh, what a lovely Christmas tree.
Thank you. Yeah, I was kind of proud of myself. Got it up so quickly this year.
That's awesome.
I got this new Christmas tree holder for fake Christmas trees. And it's like a giant bag, and you leave the lights on and you leave the tree assembled and you just put it in a gigantic bag. And then
Wow.
Christmas again, you just unroll the bag and it becomes its own tree skirt.
That's great.
It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it was really life-changing this year.
I love that for you. That sounds like it would make life a lot easier.
Oh yeah. I get a little
There
extra
we go.
light.
I was going to say you're a tiny bit dim, but that's much better. Awesome. And then, yeah, as I predicted, we have a lot more registrants who've come in sort of the 11th hour, because of the December engagement email. So I'm pulling up our most recent number, but yeah, we're in very good shape.
Wonderful.
Hello, hello. Oh, those are some very good dogs in your picture, Jeff.
Hi there. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
How's it
Nice to
going?
finally meet you.
Yeah, great to be here.
Oh, there's my calendar reminding me that we have an event coming up. Wonderful. Well, thank you both so much for jumping on a little bit early. I figure we'll just do a quick sort of walkthrough of what the event will be. We'll test screen sharing, light, sound, all that. And we'll go from there. So that is a good reminder for me to turn the captions on. I'd like to use that as a way to test the sound, because if your sound is coming through well, the captions usually come through well. And if your sound doesn't, then you get some very strange word salad in the captions. I also want to just apologize in advance. Rachel knows this, but I have been fighting off a sinus infection. And so I am definitely more congested than I like to be. So if I'm like leaning out of shot to blow my nose, that may be something that happens in the tech check. I'm not camera on during the event. I'm sort of the tech support ghost in the machine, but just for this moment. Actually going to turn the captions. I'm going to hide them for myself for now because I'm finding them a little bit distracting.
I have this "you are in a practice session" thing at the
yes. Yes, and that is actually a great thing. So I will make you both co-hosts so you can share your screen or just have full chat permissions and all of that. But yes, please do not click the start webinar, but the blue start webinar button, because that lets people in and you can't undo that. So then we would have an audience for our tech check, which is not ideal. It has happened. Excuse me. It has happened before. Wonderful. So yeah, we don't start right at 7. We give folks 2-3 minutes to join in. And during that time, the two of you, I have some welcome slides that I'll play, and the two of you are welcome to turn your video off. So that way you don't have to be, just sort of twiddling your thumbs on camera for 2 minutes while we let folks join. And I have it set up so that non-video participants are hidden. So if I stop my video, I go away. If I turn it on, it takes a second, but I come back. And so Rachel will be the first person to turn her camera on because she's going to introduce the event. And Rachel, if you want to send me a message in the Zoom chat just to let me know when you're getting ready to start, you can also just, if you forget, it's totally fine, and just turn your camera on. I'll notice that you've turned your camera on and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Is there any kind of should I wait for you to tell me, like, we've got this critical, number of people I mean, is it just up to me after that 5 minute?
Yeah, we usually do like maybe more like 3 minutes, but we'll see how many folks are on. I'm happy to cue you if you want, but I'm also totally fine with it being up to your judgment. I don't feel strongly.
I'll just pop on.
Okay, sounds great. And then so Jeff, if you do prefer Jeff or Jeffrey.
Oh, you can call me Jeff.
Cool.
And can you pronounce your last name for me, please?
It's Makala.
Makala. Okay, great. That was my guess.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, and then Jeff, when Rachel switches from introducing the library company to introducing you and reading your bio, if you wouldn't mind turning your camera on then, that way, like, folks can match the face to the name. And then Rachel will say something along the lines of, now over to you. And I know this is less, we've sort of chunked this event more than a straight down the line book talk. Do you have a sense of about how long your sort of overview runs? There's no right answer, just checking.
Yeah, I mean, I'll do 20 minutes and then I will stop. So I've got that down.
Sounds great. So yeah, at around 7:25 or so, 7:30, when you wrap up, then Rachel will switch over. Rachel can turn her camera back on. We'll move to the questions that we talked about in advance. And Rachel, if you have, follow-ups or extra ones, it seems like that would be okay. I don't want to voluntold you for that, but
I think there's enough meat in there too for some good things to come out. Some things I can't talk about in depth. So I think there should be plenty of stuff.
Awesome. And then when we switch into the audience Q&A, Rachel will read those questions out loud. So you're welcome to look at the chat if you want to, but you never have to. We find that like coming up with answers, having to look at the chat, having to sort of just engage on that divided attention span can make it more challenging for folks. So we just moderate it like it's happening live. And that should, I think that should work just fine. And I have a couple extra questions in my back pocket in case our audience usually comes and has a lot of questions, but sometimes it takes them a second to warm up. But I think I'm not worried about it. I think there will be plenty to fill our time with. And we usually don't. So we budgeted an hour for the event. We usually don't have a hard and fast stop right at 8, but we usually do if we're not like going to cut you off mid-sentence. But we do want to be respectful of time. So we try and wrap folks up at about 8:05 hard stop. Does that sound good to you?
Fair.
Great. And then, yeah, both of your sound is coming through well. One thing that I am not modeling at all, and actually I think you're both all right with it, just something that is worth thinking about is like a lot of times as people are engaged in a conversation, they'll lean forward. So if you feel like the top of your head is going to get cut off, if you lean forward, feel free to tilt your camera up a tiny bit, but I actually think both of you are fine. And then Jeffrey, is there any of the light coming through for you right now, natural light? I assume no, just
No,
I
I'm
think
in my office and I have a big wall of windows that usually gives me more daylight illumination. And I have one of those awful webcams, circular lights, but they make my eyes and my glasses look like flying saucers.
yeah. I think you're okay without it.
A little bit
I was
darker than I usually do, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's totally fine. If it was gonna get any darker than it is right now, I would say we might need more light, but I think we're okay.
So we're at where we are.
And when just you are speaking, Jeff, would you prefer for me to keep my camera on so you have a face to look at, or do you not care at all? Because
whatever you'd like to do, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. I have a
Let me
couple of,
just try sharing my screen because I do have a PowerPoint with some images and
Perfect.
stuff. So let me now and find my stuff. You can see all my emails. And there we go. PowerPoint's up.
Yep, looks great. And this is probably totally fine, but I usually, yeah, you did it already. I like to ask folks to click forwards and backwards in their slides, just because sometimes folks overclick and then get flustered, but
Good.
perfect. Okay, looks great.
Good.
I like the purple.
It's our it's our university template and Pantone color scheme.
There you go. Yeah, we did an event and are actually doing another one with excuse me, Dr. Panero. I don't know if you know him.
Colleague, yeah, he's my colleague in the history department.
Yeah.
Just did a whole series of workshops for you.
In January.
Yeah, we saw the thing.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm glad folks have been advertising it around. Yeah, so I've spent some time on the Furman website or emailing folks from Furman. So I was excited to see that there was a connection.
Yeah, Holly's someone to watch, and his book is amazing. He's doing some really cool stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. All right.
this is why I might turn my camera off.
Oh, that's what keep it on.
He's a he is a bad boy.
Sweetie.
Oh. Yeah, Rachel, I think you're totally fine to turn it off if you want. I think obviously if you need to chime in, feel free to, or want to chime in, feel free to turn it on, but I think it should be fine. And yeah, if there's any I think something that our colleague Erica Piola always says is like, nobody in our audience is expecting technical perfection. So if there's like a sound cutout or anything, we might jump in and let you know, oh, so sorry, like it cut out. Would you mind repeating what you just said? But I think we're in great shape to have a lovely, smooth running event. And I will thank you so much for sharing that discount also. I will put that in the chat. And I will
important thing is that the cheap paperback is coming out.
I will let folks know that as well.
Sell out as many hardcovers at $100 as you can, and then a year later bring out a $35 paperback that academics can afford. So
that is good to know, because I have always wondered. I'm like, when we have a lot of scholars books come out, and I'm like,
I mean, some of the big, huge university presses will bring out a simultaneous hardcover and paperback. But Penn State, that's their business model, and they're sticking to it. So, better or worse, yeah. But finally, I'm just glad to see that I finally got the notice that sometime I think in April or May, a cheap paperback is coming out. Finally,
that's good to know. I will add that to the note, and I'll drop that into the chat, and I'll also include it in my email to attendees to registrants after the event happens. And I'll also share the recording with them as well. And you'll also get a copy of the recording. It'll be on our YouTube channel if you want it for your records for any reason. Awesome. Those are the things that I was hoping to go over. We like to jump on at 6:30 just to give some buffer time in case folks are running late. So I'm happy to give us about a 10-minute break to go get some water, use the bathroom, grab a snack, and come back at around 6:57 or let's do 6:56, just again in the spirit of buffer. But is there anything else that would be helpful for us to talk through beforehand?
I guess, well, my question directly for you, Allison, is like, how long does my LiveCo introduction need to be? I assume everyone who's here is like, they already know us, and
I don't think it needs to be long. I feel like usually we end up with maybe like 3 sentences.
Great.
And I think given that this sort of lives under the auspice of your department, like if you want to say a little bit about your department too, I think you can. but you don't have to. You can keep it super straightforward. I don't think, it doesn't need to be long. And I think they'll also get a practical introduction to the library company and what we do through the talk, since there is a nice LCP process element here. So I think just, checking the main boxes of who we are, how old we are, people love to know, and the classics. I think super straightforward.
All right, excellent.
Wonderful. All right. Well, I will see you all in about 7 minutes. Thank you again.
Awesome. Great.
Hello again.
I have fed and medicated my bad cat. So I anticipate he will not give me too much trouble.
That's what you love to hear.
Yeah.
Um,
And so you have a Westie and a Scotty, is that correct? Did I see that?
We had a Scotty, we lost him recently.
Aw.
Westy's still around, and we got a rescue schnoodle over the summer. So mini schnauzer, miniature poodle combined, and we hadn't had a puppy in the house in about 14 years. So it's been a crazy couple months.
I will bet. Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And I'm sure you're familiar with the Kids in the Hall Terriers song.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Terriers are the best. They
Yes.
go on your toes.
Yep. They are wonderful.
They're so cute.
Yeah. My partner has a Cavapoo now, a
Wow.
little over a year old. So, she does her terrier things. And I had a German Shepherd Yorkie mix, if you can
Oh
believe it.
wow, that's interesting.
That's quite the mix.
It was. I had her DNA tested, and that's how I found out why she was so weird looking, why she looked like a Muppet. And she, you breed a giant dog with a tiny dog, and bad things can happen. And she was not healthy, but she was the best. Yes.
Oh.
Even a little bit of that terrier blood in him just produces a wonder.
Right. Awesome. Well, I know I made you turn your cameras on just to turn them back off, but I am going to start sharing my screen. I'll turn captions back on. And in just 1 minute's time, I'll let folks in. Yeah, and you both have chat access, so if there's anything up, feel free to let me know. But Rachel, yeah, if at 7:03 you just want to turn your camera on and we'll get set to go, I think that should work great.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. Looking forward to it.
Hello. Quick check. Can folks hear me? I believe I'm going to get a thumbs up from a colleague, and if I don't get a thumbs down, I'll just assume it's a thumbs up and continue on. Great, thumbs up received. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to our talk with Dr. Jeffrey M. Makala on his book, Publishing Plates, Stereotyping and Electrotyping in 19th Century United States Print Culture. I am Rachel D'Agostino. I'm the curator of printed books here at the Library Company of Philadelphia. For those of you who might not know us well yet, the Library Company was founded in 1731 by Benjamin Franklin and a group of his friends. We are considered America's oldest cultural institution. We were formed as a subscription library to allow individuals to pool their resources so that they could have access to the material that would help them, the intellectual content that would help them in their endeavors, one of which, of course, was eventually forming this great country of ours. And we maintain the collections that we acquired at that time. We've been acquiring collections since those days, and we continue to acquire today. When we serve as a research library that is open to anybody who could benefit from using our collections. We also have an active exhibition program. All of our exhibitions are open to the public, free of charge, and using our collections in any way is, of course, free of charge. I think that if you would like to know more about the Library Company, you will have many opportunities to get that information, and I'm always happy to talk at greater length, particularly about our collections. Suffice it to say at this moment that one of our many collecting strengths is in the area of printing and publishing history. It has been a long-standing interest of ours, and our collections speak to it in a unique and sort of comprehensive fashion, as much as one can, for early American printing and publishing. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Jeffrey Makala. There he is. Thank you. Jeffrey Makala is Associate Director of the Library for Special Collections and University Archivist at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. He has degrees from Colgate, the University of Illinois, Trinity College, and a Ph.D. in English from the University of South Carolina. A literary and book historian who studies the 19th century United States. He has written on 19th century American literature and book history in the papers of the Bibliographical Society of America, in literature and history, printing history, the Oxford Companion to the Book. Jeff is also the co-editor of Archive, South Carolina Poetry since 2005, and co-edited, now listen here, this is an important one, folks, co-edited the first comprehensive anthology of American literature about dogs. And I'm not in jest. This is wonderful, wonderful work. And we're delighted to have you here with us, Jeff. And that volume is called In Dogs We Trust, an anthology of American dog literature, published in 2019. His latest book, of course, is Publishing Plates, Stereotyping and Electrotyping in 19th Century U.S. Print Culture. It was published by Penn State University Press earlier this year. And over the past 25 years, beyond all of this wonderful scholarly work, Jeff has worked in various libraries at the University of Illinois, at Wesleyan University, and at the University of South Carolina. He is also the owner / proprietor of Two Terriers Press, which is an experimental fine press in Greenville, South Carolina. So just so folks know how this is going to work, we're going to first hear from Dr. Makala, and after that time, he and I will have a bit of back and forth discussion, after which we will welcome questions from the audience, and they can be placed in the chat feature. I think that's it. And I believe also, Jeff, you will be sharing your screen. So for that and other reasons, I'm going to make my visual scarce here. Take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Allison, for making this happen. It's a pleasure to be back virtually at the Library Company, and I appreciate the invitation to talk more about the project. Publishing Plates came out in January, and significant parts of it resulted from work that I did at the Library Company, where I had a Reese Fellowship in American Bibliography a long time ago now. But my time using the printing and publishing history collections at the Library Company and at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania next door, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit later on, gave my project direction and focus just at the right time when I needed it. And so I'm very grateful for Bill Reese and the spirit of Bill Reese and the William Reese Company for supporting the history of the book in America through fellowships, and the Library Company and HSP for being outstanding institutions. So it's great to be here. I wish I were closer, or I'd be much more of a regular using the collections. So I'm going to share my screen now and bring this up. Hopefully you can see the start of it. Okay. So my book is about how the introduction of stereotype plates into the printing trades and the nascent publishing industry in the United States in the early 19th century presented all sorts of challenges and the potential for change. So stereotyping itself, if you didn't already know, is the creation and the casting of printing plates from set type, either using paper mache or using plaster of Paris. And it was perfected in France and England in the late 18th, early 19th centuries, and it was first brought to the United States in 1812. Now, when I'm asked to explain the arguments of the book, I do tell people that I'm not necessarily interested in the plates per se. I am, but not entirely. And it's really more a book about people. The printers, the publishers, the type founders and stereotypers, authors, compositors, booksellers, and auctioneers, whose professional practice, their workload, and their livelihoods were all impacted to various degrees by the introduction of this new technology and its resulting disruptions into a rapidly changing industry. So before I get into the themes of the book, I'd like to ask you to think and consider what print culture was in the New Republic in late 18th, early 19th century America, and the technological innovations that were all being implemented in the printing trades in the first half of the 19th century. So in a very short time, in the span of one generation, the introduction of power presses, the adoption of stereotyping, the introduction of machine-made paper, and the growth and the consolidation of local printers into regional and national publishers all presented challenges and opportunities to an existing trade, the localized artisan craft practices of which had not fundamentally changed, for the most part, since the earliest days of printing in Europe in the 15th century. All of these innovations that I've just noted became market ready, at least for some well-capitalized publishers, in this 30-year period between 1810 and 1840. The most successful printers, such as Philadelphia's Matthew Carey, amassed capital, and some of it in the form of stereotype plates, and they secured wider distribution networks for their output, allowing them to rightfully be called publishers in the modern sense. If a printer/publisher made the right choice of title and followed the right business model, investing in stereotype plates could secure a greater market share and could provide years of cheap reprints. If they chose to publish the wrong text, it could tie up significant amounts of capital better used elsewhere. So the decisions about when and how to invest in this new technology became crucial to their growth and success. So perfectly timed with the time frame of tonight's topic, Jacob Bigelow, in his 1816 inaugural address as Rumford Professor at Harvard, he celebrated what he considered the unique inventive achievements of United States citizens. They were done, he thought, not with an eye to fame or fortune, but with an inherently American spirit of improvement and interest in technological progress. Bigelow argued that the origins, government, and natural resources of the United States set it apart from other nations and created the unique conditions for its advancement. A new representative democracy, unique in the world, naturally lent itself to new democratic forms of innovation in the mechanical arts. So this early articulation of American mechanical exceptionalism closely tied democratic principles with technological improvement. Bigelow's ideological position was not uncommon in the early national period, where the recognition and celebration of uniquely American ways of conduct, from political organization to spelling reform to medicine, architecture, and business, were all commonplace in a new nation attempting to establish itself on the world stage. So, what does this have to do with stereotype plates? The introduction of stereotyping offered printers new options for reprinting, investment, and the expansion of their trade. The multiple ways in which printers and publishers understood the significance of this new technology, its potential and its limitations, and how this understanding continued to evolve and change over time is the real purpose of my work. By looking closely at the decision-making processes of the people who worked through these changing times in their respective professions, I think we can avoid the trap of falling into one standard description of how the introduction of stereotyping and electrotyping played a singular role in the transformation of the 19th century printing trades. This sort of simplistic shorthand, which is still found in many of the standard printing and publishing histories, also tends to embrace varying degrees of technological determinism and positivism. Michael Warner, in his wonderful Letters of the Republic, reminds us to guard against granting technology an ontological status prior to culture, observing that practices of technology are always structural and that their meaningful structure is the dimension of culture. The technological changes that I'm interested in are fully embedded in the cultures of the early US Republic and the artisan-based apprenticeship model of labor found in the printing trades in the modern West, but also with their attendant ideologies, the Enlightenment and post-Enlightenment enshrinement of reason and forward progress, the Protestant work ethic, and the seemingly unlimited potential for human advancement offered by the boundless new American continent, brimming over with resources of every kind. But the ways in which these technologies were deployed were not at all monolithic or straightforward, and nor are these ideologies without inherent contradictions, problematic aspects, and disastrous consequences for those without political or economic influence, such as Native Americans and enslaved and free Black citizens. Stereotype plates became physical objects of capital in a marketplace, corporeal manifestations of authorship and investment properties all at once, portable and infused with the potential for reproduction and distribution in ways that had not been seen before. So by looking at printing, publishing, and authorship through a materialist lens, focused on the plates that enabled these changes to occur and the people who use them, I think we can better understand the coming industrial age of print in 19th century America. So, after a work was stereotyped, its plates were housed in small wooden crates and securely warehoused to be brought out and printed from as needed. A work no longer had to be composed anew from type when more printed copies were required. For the first time in the history of the printed book, works of authorship became quite literally material texts. They were investments that had value for their potential long-term, high-volume use to generate profit. Books as plates also had the added advantage of mobility. As objects of capital, they could be bought, sold, used as collateral, and owned by different publishers after their initial creation. The life cycle and the reproductive potential of many works extended long after their copyright, if there even was one, had expired. And so inevitably, a marketplace for used stereotype plates developed. And what you see here are two advertisements for used sets of plates being offered at publishers' trade sales later on in the 19th century. Commissioning a newly cast set of plates initially cost more than twice the standard composition costs of having a work set up in type. As firms dissolved, changed ownerships, or went bankrupt, plates were liquidated in order to pay creditors, and publishers could also simply sell their own plates off to raise capital for other projects. By mid-century, several options for buying and selling used plates were available to publishers. In addition to the publisher's trade sales, occasional advertisements for individual sets of plates appear in the 1850s in newly established trade papers such as Norton's Literary Gazette and its successor, the American Publishers Circle and Literary Gazette. And as you can see, these images are all taken from the library company's runs of these periodicals. For example, an ad announcing the sale of the plates and the copyrights to Charles Follen's German Grammar and German Reader first appeared in Norton's Literary Gazette in January 1852. The same ad appeared monthly in subsequent issues. The plates remained unsold for almost 3 years. And it appeared for the last time in November 1854, the right image, under the new headline, "For Sale, Very Cheap." The last edition of Follen's Grammar had been printed from these plates in 1849 by the Boston firm of Phillips, Sampson and Company. The same firm printed Follen's Reader from its set of plates during the 1840s, and it presumably was the seller. Charles Follen first published his German Grammar in 1827 and the German Reader in 1831. These works were no longer the only German language textbooks available in the United States in 1852, as they had been when they first appeared. Superseded textbooks, outdated reference works, and older editions of scripture that had been extensively printed from over many years constituted a substantial proportion of the first used plates set for sale. But even 30 years after being produced, the plates could be useful in some downgraded segments of the market, and eventually they did sell. An edition of Follen's Grammar, published from these same 1827 plates, was published in Boston by James Monroe, Emerson's publishers, in 1858. And an edition of the German Reader from the 1831 plates was printed in New York by Leopold and Holt as late as 1867. 36 years after its first published impression. By far the most effective means, though, of buying and selling used plates in the United States was at the newly organized publishers' trade sales. Held twice a year in Philadelphia and New York, and once a year in Boston, with later sales taking place in Cincinnati, trade sales offered publishers a chance to sell both new and older stock directly to booksellers from across the country. Small regional booksellers could in turn preview and purchase new titles from multiple publishers at once. And by the 1840s, the spring New York trade sale had grown into the major major North American sale. It was a 2-week extravaganza that attracted booksellers and publishers from across the United States and Canada. Other events included ancillary sales, hosted dinners and banquets, and extensive press coverage, making them old home weeks of sorts for publishers and a self-fulfilling celebration of the importance of the American publishing industry. I won't read this out, but I'll leave it up for a bit. Auctions of stereotype plates were featured as separate lots in published trade sale catalogs, and often with an advertisement in the trade papers. Occasional articles in the trade journals reported on some more notable prices realized at the sales. While some sets of plates sold in the $1,000 to $2,000 range, a rough equivalent of their production costs, these are generally anomalies. Most sets of used plates sold for much less than the cost of their manufacture. As US publishers became increasingly celebratory about their contributions to literate American culture, these sales offered fitting conclusions to busy weeks of literary commerce. Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper covered the trade sales for its national audience and described the work of publishers and booksellers in a high tone of serious purpose as the honorable and deliberate spread of civilization via literary commerce, even encouraging literary tourism to the trade sale floors, as you can see here in this quote from 1854. On the 15th of July, 1851, Norton's reported on a Philadelphia trade sale held by a new firm, M. Thomas and Sons, which did a brisk business, apparently to the surprise of the Norton's editorial staff. A highlight of Thomas's first sale was the stock of stereotype plates owned by Thomas Davis, the surviving partner of McCarty and Davis, one of the first Philadelphia publishers to commission stereotype plates back in the 1820s. And there are some McCarty and Davis papers at the Rosenbach. Norton's saw fit to list the most important plates sold and their prices. Of particular interest here, in addition to the substantial prices realized for Sargent and Rawle and Bacon's abridgment, is one of McCarty and Davis's sets of stereotype plates to its collection of Shakespeare, which was first published in 1823 and cast in New York by the type founder Jedediah Howe. These plates are among the earliest to arrive in Philadelphia, years before anyone began casting stereotype plates in the city. McCarty and Davis were later able to persuade Howe to come down from New York and set up his foundry in their city as Philadelphia's first stereotyper. This set of plates was their first commission and one of their strongest steady sellers. It was brought out as a jointly published venture with Matthew Carey. From a single setting of type, Jedediah Howe made two sets of plates that were different, with different orientations, an 8-volume duodecimo edition, and then a 2-volume quarto edition. At some point in the late 1840s, Davis sold one of his two sets of Shakespeare's plates to, quote, a persistent publishing firm in Boston for $1,500, and this set being the other, which he kept until his retirement. Stereotype plates from the large firm of Putnam and Company were sold at auction in 1851, and a New York Tribune reporter waxed lyrical on the promise of the wider dissemination of these literary works across the country as a result. What is particularly striking in this passage is its allusion to a form of literary manifest destiny, to the potential of the book trades through the sale of plates and American works to regional publishers out west to impact citizens' lives in new markets across the Western United States. The life or the afterlife of literary property had been extended because of the trade sale format, and its method moved capital from owner to owner so that more books could be printed domestically and sent out across the country to white American citizens as they occupied new lands. The publishers and the booksellers of the United States, never humble in their self-congratulatory rhetoric of promoting Western civilization and American values, were publicly praised in passages like this for their collaborative efforts at the sales. As the largest trade sale organized by the publishing industry in the United States to date, the March 1854 New York sale occasionally lapses into myth in publishers' memoirs. At a grand banquet held for the members of the New York Book Publishers Association during the sale, Boston publisher James T. Fields was called upon to speak. He chose, as was his wont, to read a poem that he had written that day on the salesroom floor, excerpt of which is up here. The idealized conviviality of the trade comes through in these lines, together with Fields's proclivity for making playful puns of his fellow publishers' names. More of Putnam's plates sold that day, but he feeds us just the same. And the final stanza on the right provides promises eternal heavenly reward for the good works done by the members of the association, with the promise of that same conviviality in heaven. It was easy to be convivial when business was uniformly good for all and the market strong. A report in Norton's gave the revenues for this sale at about $350,000. Other sales of plates at that sale were disappointing, however. Twice Married, A Tale of Connecticut Life, with an attached 10% copyright, was sold for just $20 to the only bidder, even though the plates themselves cost $133 to make. Like low auction estimates today, the production costs of sets of plates were frequently listed in the trade sale catalogs as a benchmark indicator of value and as an inducement to bid for publishers seeking a bargain. The Tribune saw fit to print a somewhat embarrassing list of works that were sold off for their value as metal alone, all at less than 10% of cost. In summing up the results of this sale, the Tribune reported that, quote, "It probable that not one of the volumes had paid for itself, so that Miller and Curtis were like to be exceedingly temperate if their only wine was to be the drunk out of the skulls of authors." So, in addition to this book trade history, I also spend a good deal of time in the book looking at how individual publishers, such as Philadelphia's Matthew Carey, and organizations such as the American Bible Society in New York, began to negotiate the world of stereotyping and stereotype editions in their own businesses. Matthew Carey navigated a changing national marketplace in quarto Bibles between 1813 and 1824. Carey already owned two of the only complete Bibles in standing type in the United States, from which he could print as many copies as he needed anytime he wanted. So the introduction of stereotype Bibles by several New York type founders in the mid-1810s complicated his market share. As the production of multiple sets of quarto Bible plates threatened to upend the market, Carey was forced to make decisions about acquiring some of these sets for their own use. And he was also forced to react to increased competition for the same product produced by competitors using a newer technology. Carey's main regional competitor, the New York printer and stereotyper Collins and Company, produced exactly the same range of Bible variants from its newly cast set of stereotype plates that Carey could, but Collins undercut Carey on price every time. So in order to maintain his market share, Carey purchased a complete set of quarto Bible plates, only to store it untouched for several years in an unsuccessful, ultimately, attempt to embargo it and maintain a fleeting regional monopoly on the quarto Bible trade. Within a few years, as multiple sets were used for the production of the same work in cities throughout the country, Carey's advantages finally dissolved as the marketplace for quarto Bibles became diffuse and oversaturated. We can talk more about Carey in a bit. So to sum up, my work examines how printing and publishing worlds in the United States in the early 19th century reacted to change, how individuals, businesses, and organizations use new technologies to further their aims, and how the cultures of plates that emerged had broader meanings that rippled out and influenced authorship, popular culture, and everyday life and language through their ultimate products, printed material texts. This new understanding of the role of material texts in many different forms pervades 19th century American culture, from the physicality and the ubiquity of the plates themselves to the popular uses of the term stereotyping as a metaphor for the expansiveness and the limitations of rapid technological change. So I'll stop now and stop my sharing. And I'm happy to talk more.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. We do have I have some questions here that have been pre-prepared for you, but we also have some coming into the Q&A feature of Zoom. So I want to make sure we have time for those, and please, if folks have more questions, keep adding them. So as you probably know, we are right now doing a lot of Jim Green celebrating at the Library Company. And for those who don't know, Jim Green is the recently retired former capital L librarian of the Library Company, also an excellent Matthew Carey scholar in his own right. And I'm sure the two of you worked quite a bit, and I see Jim's influence in your volume wonderfully. So I was wondering if you could talk about Jim's influence on the project and any other important influences that helped to shape this work.
Oh, sure. Yeah, Jim's chapter in the History of the Book in America, in the second volume, covers just everything that I was talking about right now, the industrialization of the printing trades in the early 19th century. And because of the limitations of the scope of the volume, I naturally started asking, well, where's the rest of the evidence? Like, where's all this coming from? What are the publishers doing and talking to each other and all that? So it was really, Jim's essay that first started me down part of this path. Michael Winship's essay, he wrote an article on printing history in the mid-'80s, calling for more research into stereotyping, which hadn't been done until this point either, was another influence. And when I got to Library Company and sat down and had many good conversations with Jim, this sort of just grew and amplified. So I'm grateful for his time and attention and his influence and his writing on Matthew Carey, and as well as industrial printing in America at that time. I'm grateful to Connie King, also recently retired. Crystal Appio was there, and Linda August, of course. Were great influences and help, just getting the stuff out and understood, and everything out in one place. So no, it's a wonderful place, and the conviviality of the fellows and the fellows colloquium and just the environment and atmosphere. It's just wonderfully supportive of every aspect of American culture, but for the book history people among us, yeah, it's an especially great place to be there. And I owe Jim a tremendous amount. So I'm glad that you're rightfully honoring and celebrating him right now, because he deserves it.
Excellent, thank you. And this is, well, many topics are difficult to research, but as you well know, and some of our viewers will know, there are very, very few actual archives of early American printers or publishers. Matthew Carey's is one that we actually have more access to than most other printers or publishers from that time period. Of course, as we get a little bit later, we get a little bit more documentation, but because of that difficulty, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process when entering a research project like this, and how you sort of attempt to dig into and get what you need in a collection like ours.
Yeah, I mean, my main task was just to identify all the early 19th century publishers' archives that were out there, and to see if there's anything related to stereotyping and electrotyping. The most wonderful thing about the Matthew Carey collections, the print collections that are at Library Company, and then the Lee and Febiger papers, which is Matthew Carey's papers, Carey and Son, Carey and Lee, Lee and Febiger, next door at HSP, are the comprehensiveness. So having all of Carey's multiple Bible variants in one place to lay out together, to try to figure out which one was printed from plates, which one was not, at the point where I didn't know that. He was printing from his standing type Bible after he purchased plates, but I didn't know he hadn't printed from the plates yet. Same thing with the New Testament that he bought and also had in standing type. The catalogs, the printed catalogs of Carey and Son are amazing. And I can show images of some of the slides of that too for his Bible variants. And all the other attendant things there are just amazing. As I showed, the run of Norton's Literary Gazette and all the other printing trade papers for later in the century at the Library of Company are just wonderful resources. Next door at HSP, the amazing thing that I first discovered when I got into those papers was that Carey created letter books of all his outgoing correspondence. Nobody else does this in America. So we have all the incoming correspondence from everywhere he's talking to. And because of his date range, he corresponded with Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, as well as a young critic named Edgar Allan Poe in the 1830s. Spanning that Revolutionary War generation to the mid-19th century critical generation. So it's amazing, the incoming stuff. But then having letter books where all his outgoing responses are, to be able to piece the chain of correspondence back together in one place was just a tremendous advantage. And the volumes are huge. There are, oh gosh, I don't know, 250, 300 boxes of correspondence and letter books there. So it just took months and months of work, but you can actually reconstruct the process by which Carey is writing to these type founders and stereotypers in New York and making inquiries, sounding them out, refusing their offers of work and casting, finally coming around, complaining about price, setting terms for the negotiation, the trading of stock instead of paying outright for a set of plates. He sold used type to them for melting down. Every ways in which he was able to get a business advantage and secure more profits and not pay outright for as much as he could to get the best deals. So all that is unfolding. And we have the wonderful records that show those transactions over many years in many cases too, because as we know from all the people who write about the book trades in America before the railroads, this is a regional operation that is weather dependent and stagecoach dependent and ship dependent for moving goods and services and mail back and forth. So the process of casting and commissioning a Bible and getting shipments in crates in small increments over time that could get damaged in transit and were ultimately unfolds over many months or many years in the correspondence. So I could go on and on about this, but it's wonderful. I wish AAS, of course, up in Worcester has the Isaiah Thomas and Andrews papers. They don't have the same balance of incoming and outgoing stuff. So we can't piece together as much of the story as well. So I was able to really devote a long chapter to telling that story of how Cary was negotiating this interesting path of technological change.
Thank you. Cary was certainly an interesting character, and it should not be surprising that he kept that record of his outgoing correspondence, being rather proud of most of his endeavors, as he was. And you have some wonderful quotes from him in this book that
he's wonderfully irascible and cranky when things aren't happening to his liking. He was wonderful about calling all these booksellers and suppliers and type founders to task for every little thing and really running them through the ringer. It's wonderful.
Yeah. All right, so let me go to some of the questions in the chat. Our first one here is from Sherry Harris, and Sherry writes, where can I find out more information on my third great-grandfather, Jedediah Howe, who came to Philadelphia between 1820 and 25 and supposedly was the first electrotypist in America? Well, I'll give you the first answer. You can read more about Jedediah Howe in this book, but Jeff, could you talk a little bit about where you might recommend a person to go to find information on?
So there is correspondence from Jedediah Howe as a type founder, as a stereotyper from this period in the Lee and Febiger correspondence records in the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. And there's also some tracings of him in the McCarty and Davis papers at the Rosenbach as well, in his professional capacity. I don't know of a Howe collection in Philadelphia area repositories. I hadn't come across that. And I certainly don't know his genealogy at all. So that's great to hear, but he gets a shout out, certainly, as being the first. And I don't know if he was the first electrotyper in Philadelphia. That's a good question. I don't know that. I shorthanded by saying stereotyping, but stereotyping and its companion process is electrotyping, where a plate was made by taking a form of set type and you immerse it into a vat of copper solution and pass an electrical current through it. And over time, a thin film of copper atoms forms and you get a nice, better, crisper impression. And that was really the dominant method for making plates starting in the middle of the 19th century. I tend to just shorthand it and say stereotyping, but it's really stereotyping and electrotyping is more prevalent and common by mid-century on forward into the 20th century, really.
All right, and actually on that same note, Cheryl Thurber asks, was it possible to later make a copy of a set of stereotype plates, making a copy from the plates? If you could talk just a little bit more about the technological process and the limitations therein.
And this is why the 19th century is very messy and fun when it comes to book history, because copies of copies of copies could be made. It's hard to tell sometimes whether a book was printed from type or printed from plates. And certainly for images, for cuts, they would be copied and copied and copied extensively from multiple copies all the time. So that's one advantage too, that you could have larger size plates made of illustrations copied via the stereotyping and electrotyping processes too. So absolutely, you can just keep making copies and the type wears down, the plates wear down, and you can see early versus late plates, after, certainly for the Bibles, the hundreds of thousands of copies of a Bible printed from an American Bible Society plates over 25, 30 years, the plates wear down and they squeeze every last impression out of them. But you could certainly copy a plate just as you could copy set type, just as you could copy a woodcut or a metal cut or an engraving or something too. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have a question here from Philip Katz regarding copyright. He asks, can you say more about copyright? And he had noticed that several of the ads you shared list that both copyright and stereotypes are for sale. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that?
So copyright for literary works can take any of a number of forms in the 19th century. It isn't the standard sort of publisher royalty kind of thing that we know today. That comes a little bit later. So sometimes a publisher might take a copyright outright from the author for a set fee and just have it as part of it. And if their set of plates have the copyright attached, and after 5 years they decide to sell the work off, the copyright goes with it. In other cases, an author might sell the copyright to a publisher for a certain amount of time, 8 years, and then it would expire or it would revert back to the author. And again, if the publisher decides to offload the plates to raise capital, the copyright would come attached with those plates for a certain amount of time. And it's other times there's a joint operation where a certain percentage of profits are done. The big publishers, and by mid-century, are starting to take the cost of creating a set of plates out of an author's cut or royalties as well. Famously happens with Melville, but also offering the author the right to repurchase the plates of their own works from the publisher if the publisher decides not to create any further reprints. And Melville famously did not have the money, the means to buy back the plates to the Piazza Tales and the Confidence Man when his publisher went bankrupt, and the plates were withdrawn from a trade sale, and they were probably just dispersed and melted down. So there's all sorts of different complicated author-publisher models at this period. It's another messy 19th century thing, which is good for literary history.
That's another element in this book that I most enjoyed, was the in-depth kind of mini examinations of Walt Whitman and Sojourner Truth, and how they navigated this landscape, changing landscape in really very astute ways. So thank you for that. Back to our viewer questions here. You mentioned, this is from Kojo Randall L. I hope I'm pronouncing all of that correctly. You mentioned 1812. Can you speak to the correlation between that date and the early prints in the US?
So the first set of plates to come to America arrived in the fall of 1812. It was commissioned by the Bible Society of Philadelphia, which still exists. And they bought a set of plates from the British and Foreign Bible Society, and they had them delivered after the start of the War of 1812, actually. They presumably got through somehow to Philadelphia after the war had started. And the first domestically cast plates happened the following year in New York in 1813. So, and that was to a Westminster Catechism, a couple of classics editions, and then finally a New Testament in 1814 that Matthew Carey ended up buying a copy of those plates and bringing them to Philadelphia, but not printing from them. So domestic casting started in 1813 in New York and continued with a number of sort of type founders who took on the stereotype casting role as a natural extension of their practice after having gone to Britain to kind of see it up front and learn some of the secrets and trades and spread. And by the 1820s, there were stereotypers in upstate New York and Massachusetts, and Jedediah Howe comes down to Philadelphia in about 1824. And by 1830, there must be 25, 30 stereotypers all throughout the East Coast of North America.
It is really remarkable how it ramps up so quickly, and particularly your chapter on the American Bible Society. Well, they ramped up in a different way, certainly, than others did at that time, but they embraced it, didn't they? I'm fascinated by how quickly that organization was able to embrace this technology. And
one of the reasons that they essentially were formed as an amalgamation of all these smaller regional and city Bible societies was that the New York businessmen founders saw the technology and its potential for rapidly opening up the scale of the distribution of scripture to America and doing it on a national level rather than through these small individual regional or city Bible societies. And that's what they did. They started commissioning plates and getting multiple sets of plates and printing them on multiple presses all at once, and just flooded the universe with Bibles and New Testaments.
Before we get back to the questions here, I just want to follow up on that a little bit, because I was fascinated by how poorly the work was being executed in Kentucky for the American Bible Society relative to what was going on sort of more under their close supervision. And was just wondering if you had come across any explanation. Was it that they had not appreciated the challenges, maybe hadn't appreciated the talent of their local folks, Fanshawe in particular, or I just can't quite wrap my head around it.
Yeah. So the American Bible Society sent a set of stereotype plates out to Kentucky, and it went out sort of via Pittsburgh and Ohio and then down, and it finally got there. And the Kentucky Bible Society was going to start printing its own Bibles using those plates for the Western distribution and trade. But the plates may have gotten damaged in transit. And even though they're type high, they were able to be made type high with a wooden block or a metal block, the printers who worked on them maybe had too much of a heavy hand. You know, letterpress printers speak of the kiss of the type on paper. They might have been a little bit too harsh on their impressions, and they wore down the plates very quickly or made them uneven, and the production of what they produced that they sent then back to New York to say, here's an example of our work, what we're about to get ready for distribution, kind of appalled the managers of the American Bible Society, and said, oh my gosh, what is this horrible stuff? It's uneven, it's on awful paper, it's worn, and it looks like a Bible that's been printed for 100,000 impressions over 10 years, and it's ready for the type pot, for melting down. So for whatever reasons, the printers didn't quite get the hang of it. And this happens also in New York with other printers who are printing on commission. A publisher will job out or loan out a set of plates to a printer for striking off an edition. And for whatever reasons, they just don't get it quite right, being able to create a nice even balance on the bed, or getting it just where it needed to be, rather than type. If your type is uneven, you unlock it, you tamp it down very carefully, and you get everything wonderfully level. If your plate is uneven, it's going to print unevenly, it's going to ink unevenly, and it's going to wear down horribly. So it took a couple people having bad experiences for finally a select group of experienced printers to have that experience and in working with them on a hand press.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of that technology, Philip Katz asks, when did the stereotyping technology become obsolete? Or what did it transform into?
Well, gosh, I don't get into the 20th century much in the book. One has to have limitations. But I mean, the New York Times was printing from curved electrotype plates as late as 1962. Let's say, before they finally moved over to, photo mechanical, some sort of photo mechanical printing. So certainly in the newspaper industry, curved printing plates were being generated well into the middle of the 20th century. And that's just par for the course. And same thing really for book production in many cases. Someone needs to write a book about the shift from relief printing to photomechanical printing in the middle to second third of the 20th century, because that's another tremendous shift, all of which happens within a generation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Thank you. We have a couple other questions about Jedediah Howe. He is a hot topic, and Sandra Markham wonderfully included a note in the Q&A about Hezekiah Howe's papers at Yale. And there's a link there for folks in the Q&A, which I assume folks can grab it from there, but if there's any reason that folks could not grab that link there, maybe we could put it into the chat, but I think it's accessible. And there it is in the chat. Thank you. All right. Cheryl Thurber asks the following. I have been working on the American Sunday School Union, which adopted stereotyping in 1820s, including for their catalog pages. One issue was with lithographs, which involved stone plates, or just giant stones, and those books were not reprinted. Where does stone lithography fit in your story?
Right. Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's the chapter I didn't include in the book. The Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia and downtown has the American Sunday School Union records, hard copies, and they have big runs of microfilm. And then they're another tremendous, amazing resource, because right from the 1820s, 24 or so, when it was founded, they, like the Bible Society, they took that model and just ran with generating plates for all of their tracts, all their textbooks, all the sort of things that they produced for the Sunday school movement. Lithography, you know, it's a separate process. It's a third process from relief and intaglio printing, and it's used for illustrations. And certainly it does color and texture and depth and gradation wonderfully. So for the sort of the cheap printing, for the most part, that we're looking at in terms of the American Bible Society and even the Sunday School Union for their main core textual production, it's all plates. Lithography is still good for illustrations, and it remains that. And Philadelphia, of course, was the center of chromolithography, high-end chromolithography in the 19th century. Yeah, but again, it's different process. You just have to tip in your illustration. Separate press, separate process, separate shop, generally producing these to order. So yeah.
I don't see any further questions in here, which is great, because that means I get to ask one. I was wondering, you mentioned Sonia Hazard refers to Joseph Smith and the golden plates of the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
And you mentioned this.
They're a coincidence.
In this, interesting. And yeah, so the timing is wildly consistent with this burgeoning industry in stereotype plates and electrotype plates, and those specifically being heavily used by religious publishers.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you could either talk a little bit more about the, you know, why there is this close connection between the religious publishers and stereotypes, or alternately, other examples that you may have come across that sort of reference stereotypes, you know, in some other sector of the culture, right? And I don't mean like today how we use stereotypes, though you do a wonderful explanation, give a wonderful sort of genealogy of the phrase, sort of from the start to late 19th century anyway. So yes, please, I will stop talking.
Yeah, Sonia Hazard wrote a wonderful article maybe about 2 years ago where she's talking explicitly about Joseph Smith, founding of the LDS Church, the first printing of the Book of Mormon, and print culture and stereotyping. So one analogy I'll use is that Sonia is the T.H. Huxley to my Charles Darwin in a way. She went where I didn't. She made the connections that I didn't in the book. I had to reference it, but it would have been another half chapter to go into that more. But it's quite interesting because there were no stereotypers in and around Palmyra, New York, right, where the first Book of Mormon was printed. But Syracuse, Utica, where printers were printing from plates. Rochester by 1832 probably were printing from some commissioned plates. There are stereotypers over in the Hudson River Valley, of course. And from his travels and things, Joseph Smith almost assuredly knew about these technological changes in the printing trades. And had he been an astute observer of a print shop somewhere, might have seen crates of plates being unboxed and moved onto presses and being printed from, right at the time when he uncovered the bound plates on the Hill Cumorah. So I'll leave it out there to everyone to investigate Sonia's article and be convinced for themselves. But yeah, there were plenty of also examples of bad decisions that printers made in commissioning plates. There's a book called like The Complete Coiffure, which is a hairstyling manual in about 1818 that existed in a stereotype edition. And it went through one impression, and further impressions and the plates are forever lost to history. It would make no sense to stereotype an almanac that's good for 1 year, or a city directory. You needed something that would be a steady seller over time to recoup your costs. And The Complete Coiffure was out of fashion probably right after it got printed, from whatever reports came back from France and England, and there it went. So there are all sorts of failed examples too. And I talk about this a little bit in the American Bible Society chapter too. There were printers who took on who, let's say, overpromised and underdelivered in their abilities and skills to produce sets of plates for market as well. So there's the failed examples are as interesting, or more interesting maybe, than the successful ones, right? Because we can learn from them.
Thank you. I do notice there's one other question connected to Hal, who I see must have had a foundry on Crown Street in Philadelphia. Could you talk to us just briefly about what these spaces would have been like in which the stereotyping was conducted, and if it was materially different in some way from what type foundries had?
Yeah. So I showed an image, maybe the third or fourth slide, of a stereotype foundry, and that's from the 1820s, 1830s. It was a separate, individual type casting. If you've seen it, the little hand gesture that you just put your plug in and you fill it up and you get your little piece of type out. To cast a set of plates, you had to first get your set type, create a plaster of Paris mixture that was the right texture, cover your form of set type with graphite, plumbago is called then, a fine lead powder, to prevent adhesion. Press in your plaster of Paris around the form, let it dry overnight or however long it took. And then you had to carefully pry that plaster of Paris hardened piece off the form of type, which hopefully you graphited enough so that you had that positive impression that you could then use as a mold for lead. And so the stereotyping pots were these big square, 1 foot by 1.5 foot little vats with a hook on top that were held, and the plaster of Paris piece was fit into it, and then the whole mold was filled up with set type, and it would be broken off, and then the plate itself would have to be beveled on the edges and shaved down and smoothed out. So it took skill and operation, far and above just casting a single piece of type in a type founder's mold. So yeah, and so it took them a while to get right and to do it, and it was messy. It was dangerous and hot and molten lead mixture all around, and all the things that go with that. And then later, it's discovered that what's called a dry mold, a paper mache mold, would do the same thing as plaster of Paris. A lot thinner, a lot less dusty and fraught with all sorts of conditions. And that's where we get flong from, F-L-O-N-G, right? You see that if you look on eBay, you'll find pieces of flong, which is the paper mache mold of a copy of a stereotype plate to a newspaper plate or something. And that was the dominant medium after that, again, by late century. Oh, Rachel, I think you're muted.
Oh,
yeah.
Sorry. Yes. I almost got through the entire thing without talking through a mute. Apologies for that. We are at time. So I just want to say again, Jeff, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. It is always really rewarding to be able to hear from someone who used our collection so thoroughly and obviously effectively, and who is as excited about issues like these as we are at the library company.
Absolutely. It's such a wonderful collection and such wonderful people, and it's such a great institution. Like I said, I wish I lived closer. I'd be around a lot more working on it. So thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Allison, and thank you all for coming out. It was great. I love talking about this sort of thing with people who like to listen about this sort of thing and talk about it. It's great.
Thank you. We'd love to have you back to talk to us about In Dogs We Trust. But you know, for another time. All right. Thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for joining us.
Thank you all for coming out.
Be well.